Hi folks, Tom Affolter here today, and I want to talk to you a little bit about animation in C#, the most basic animation that C# has, which is the SetBounds command. So the objectives that I have within this discussion will be understanding the SetBounds. At the same time, we're going to talk about the limitations of what SetBounds is, and we'll talk real briefly about Unity. We'll also talk about the limitations of the dot size and the dot location properties, and then we'll come along and talk about understanding that SetBounds and what it does and what it can't do. Things such as moving objects, resizing objects on the screens. So we'll take a look at the SetBounds arguments and the overloads as well. So this course doesn't focus on game animation, nor does this lecture, by the way. What we focus on is developing business applications, and occasionally inside that business application you're going to have the need for animation. And we're talking about animation. I'm not necessarily talking about a graphic character running across the screen or shoot 'em up. I'm talking about the ability to move items on the screen, the ability to resize items on the screen. And in the process of doing that, we can come up with some basic animation properties that I think you'll enjoy. The SetBounds command is really limited to two different aspects. It's limited to modifying the X and the Y location of where that object is on a form. So you can move left or right, up or down. You also have the ability, as we're going to find out with SetBounds, to resize that control's height and its width. And that control, by the way, could be a graphic image if you want. We can make that graphic image move across the screen, down the screen. We can do them individually, or we can do those at the same time. Let's talk real briefly about Unity. But if you are interested in using C# and designing animation, graphic type games, then Unity is probably the direction that you want to push yourself. Unity uses C# as a primary language, although Unity is not a Microsoft technology. Again, it does use Microsoft type commands. You should understand how to go in and use the basic concepts of Unity. And later within this program, you will find we will introduce you to Unity design. Rather than going back in and showing you the SetBounds command and understanding all the different overloads methods, I think our best bet will be to dive directly in and start working on a demonstration to understand it best. Let's go ahead and work on a demo to see SetBounds in action. So I'm going to create a Windows form. We'll call this one SetBounds demo. And everything looks appropriate. Click OK. And let's give ourselves a little bit more room. Now what I want to do to start with is I think I'm going to go ahead and throw a button onto this form, and this is the button that we're going to be manipulating. Let me change the form font a little bit so everything's a little bit larger. So let's change the form font to 11. Makes it a little bit too big. And let's adjust that down in size a bit here. Put that button on the screen. Let's call that button BTN Click Me. And let's put Click Me on the button. There we go. So we've got a button there, we've got Click Me. The next thing I'm going to do is create a group box to hold a control I'm going to drop in here. And let's see here, what do I want to have happen in here? Use a, let's do a vertical scroll bar here. Okay. So I grab that vertical scroll bar. I'm going to stick it right here as such. There we go. And I'm going to take that vertical or that group box here. I'm going to copy it 4 times. So I'm going to copy this guy. I'm going to paste it 4 times. 1, 2, and there's my 4th one right there. Okay. Now, inside this group box over here, I'm going to call this one my X group box. I'm going to call this one my Y group box. This will be my height and my width as such. And then let's take a look at this form size here. So if I come over here and look at the form, my form now has a width of 1,176. Let's make that an even 1,200 width right there. Okay, there's my width, and my height is 627. Let's make that an even 650 for my height. And let's drop these guys down a little bit, give myself a little bit more room up on the screen here. Dealing with this X, I want my X then to be able to, and X is going to be across the top, so it's got to be able to go from 1 all the way over to a width of 1,200. So let's adjust this guy. And we're going to set a minimum on this guy of 1. And we decided a maximum of 1,200. So again, grab that and change that to 1,200 for the maximum number right here, 1,200. So I'm allowing this control here to scroll between 1 and 1,200 as I move it up and down, back and forth. Okay, and let's move this all the way over here right now to the top left corner. And here's Y. Let's go back and adjust Y out. I'm going to make it equal to the left one. Now Y is up and down, so I have to have the ability to go from 1 to 650. So let's change this guy here. We're going to do from 1, minimum, 650 is the max, and the minimum is 1. So that sets the range of that scroll bar. So as I scroll, it changes that value around. Height here, let's just play around with height. Let's say that the height can be, let's just, right now, we'll set a height of 200. So let's allow the size of that to be a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 200. And for the width, we'll do the same thing. So a minimum of 1, a maximum of 200. Now I need to go back in and let's make sure all these objects are the same size. Okay, and let's go back in and name these guys now. So I've got a vertical scroll bar. I'm just going to call these VS. So I'll have vertical scroll bar X. I have vertical scroll bar Y. I have vertical scroll bar height. And my vertical scroll bar width. I think I got everything in order. Let's go ahead and run it and just see what it's going to look like right now, real quickly. So I've got scroll bars here. I should be able to scroll up and down on any one of these, and whatever number I land on is going to be the number that's returned. And again, this is going to be from 1 to the width, from 1 to the height, and then we have 1 to 200, 1 to 200 on each one of these. So they all have names on them. Now let's go back in and talk about how we can make this form work and this demonstration work. What I want to do is, as one of these guys changes, so as this X changes here, I want it to change the X location of click me. So let's try this. Right here, let's highlight this object. Let's get out of the run. Highlight the object, and if we go back into the event handlers, you're going to see that there's a scroll event, and the scroll event fires each time the value of the scroll changes, and this is the one that we want. So let's start with the X first. So I'm going to double click here, and let's prove that that works. Let me increase the size of the font here a little bit, and let's prove that it works. What I want to do now is I want to change the location of that particular item there, which is button click me. So let's come back here to that code again. Okay, I want to select button click me dot, and if I look down, there's going to be a SetBounds in there. So let's just take a moment and look at what SetBounds has. Let's look at the overloads in here. So I'm going to do, I select SetBounds, hit my left, and you'll see that there's two different options for SetBounds. One of them says I can give it the X, the Y, the width, and the height as one command, and it's going to make all that happen. That's not the one that we're normally going to want to use, though, because we don't normally go back in there and specifically say, here's going to be the X and Y location, here's the height and width. You usually change 1, 2, but usually not all 4 of them. In order to do that, you'll need the second overload. There's 2 versions of this. So if I hit the down arrow, here is the second version. Notice in here it says, give me the X, give me the Y, the width and the height. But now I've got this extra property at the end called bounds specified. And this is a cool command because what it now lets me do is go back in there and tell it what of these I want to look at. If I only want to change X and Y, bounds specified will let me only change the X and Y, whereas the previous overload said they all have to change. Let me give you an example in this one. So right now, we know that we're changing the value of X right here. As I scroll up and down, I want to know what value between 1 and the height or the width of the screen is returned. Okay, so in order to do that, I want to change the X value to whatever is currently value in that scroll bar. And that scroll bar, if we look back over here at properties, has a value. I believe it's a value. Let's make sure I got it selected here. It has a value in here, and that's what's returned. And notice that value in here is an integer, which means it shouldn't have to be cast as a number. So let's go back again at our code and see what we can do here. So what I want to do right off the bat is I want to take that object, so that's going to be VSX value. So let's take whatever the VSX value is, whatever that value is, then I'm going to tell it, let's ignore the Y, let's ignore the width, let's ignore the height, and then when I hit a comma, now I want to do a bounds specified. And if I type in BOUN, bounds specified, and I hit a period, this is where I get to tell it what I want it to look at over on the left-hand side. And all I want it to look at, the default would be everything. Okay, none is useless because it ignores everything. But all I want it to do in this entire line here is only look at the X. And that's what I've got to do right there. So let's go ahead and close that out, and let's see what's happening here. So it says that, you know what I didn't do is I put the object name in here, but I need to go back in and put .value in here. That's going to return the number. So let's just see what happens now when we run this. One single line of code in here, I'm telling it, look at whatever that scroll bar has in the value, and whatever it is, set that SetBounds to the X location. Well, let's run it. See what happens here. So I'm going to grab this X and drag it. Look what happens. There's my animation right there. So I can move it back and forth, and whatever the value is where it's going to drop, and it should let me go all the way to the left, and notice that border is sitting right here. I can move it back onto the screen. Now it's interesting to note I can move things off the screen. Now I might want to hide things later. Let's continue on and let's do the Y as well. So now I'm going to do the same thing I did before with this Y. I'm going to grab this guy right here. I'm going to put a scroll event on it. And I'm going to grab this code right here. I'm going to copy it out. I'm going to paste it right here. But this time, okay, my values change. I wanted to ignore the Y, but I do want it to look at, ignore the X, but I want it to look at the Y. So this time I'm going to do VS. I'm going to find my Y control, VS Y control, dot value. Okay. Now, if I ran it right now, I would have a problem because it's going to always want to set X to 0 because that's all it's looking at. So here I need to tell it, no, I want you only to look at the Y value. Let's go back and run it. So now I can use this X value to move it back and forth, but I can use the Y value to move it up and down. So there's my animation right there, moving left and right and up and down, just like that. Okay, let's continue on with the height and the width. They're a little bit different. So let's go back to the height. Okay, I'm going to do a scroll on the height. I'm going to paste that same code I had a minute ago in here. This time I'm going to put zeros in for the value for X and Y, but now I have my height here. Let's make sure that I've got the right argument, comma, and so I'm sitting at width right now. We're going to play with height, so that's the last argument over here. So now I'm going to do the VS, which is the name of the objects. I'm looking for VS height dot value. Okay, and then over here, I'm going to hit a period and tell it all I really want is the height. Noticed. So I'm going to select height here. Let's go back and run this and see what happens now. So I can move it to the right. I can move it down. Let's see what height does. Height lets me change the height of the object. So I still can move it around. I still have that height. I've only allowed a maximum height of 200 on it. I could go back and change that number. But again, notice how I can move it up. Let's finish it off by looking at the width. We'll go back, finish width off here. I'm going to scroll here, paste it, do exactly what we did before. This time we're going to put 0 in here. Okay, right here now is going to be our width at this point. So I'm going to do VS width to pull up that control that had the width in it, dot value here. And then right over here, I'm going to back up and make sure that I select width. And I should be good to go. So let's go ahead and run this. Move my X over, my Y down. I can apply my height to make it high. And then let's try width. And then there's my width. Okay. So SetBounds is a pretty amazing feature. It's not what you would think of as a gaming feature, a true gaming feature, but it does allow you to have some animation. Let's take a look at one more example here. I'm going to go ahead here and bear with me for a moment. I have to find an image, so give me just a second. Okay, I've got this sailor walking man. He is under SetBounds, so here's the location. I'm going to take this guy right here and put him back in my image. So we're going to change things around a little bit just to show you some animation. So I'm going to copy that location up above here, where it's located at. Okay, I'm going to come back over to my application here, and I'm going to delete this out right here. Get rid of him. Now I'm going to have several errors in here. I'm going to grab a picture box, drop that picture box right here. In that picture box now, I'm going to choose an image, and this time let's import that image that I just looked at here. That would be, make sure I go to the right version of it here. That would be this guy right here, I believe. Okay, notice that he's animated. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to make sure he stretches in the image so that he fits inside the image. And I'm going to resize it to match. Now he's actually walking backwards, but I will show you what we can do with this guy right here. So now I need to go back to my application. Let's change the name of this to Pick Sailor. Okay, I'm going to grab and copy that. Let's go back into our code, and I'm going to do an edit. Let's do a find and replace. Let's do a quick replace. Okay, I'm going to replace it with Pick Sailor, and I want all these buttons because they don't exist anymore to be replaced with that new name. I'm saving myself some typing here, and let's replace all of them. Okay, so now I'm changing Pick Sailor over here. So let's take a look at an example of what's going to happen. I believe there may be an issue, but we'll correct that in just a second if there is. So let's come back over here, look at our form, let's start it, and you'll see the animated character walking around, and I should be able to move him, or I can move him like he's walking. Just like that. But you can see now how the character moves around. You will find, folks, that occasionally, if you have an animation in the screen and you make a change like that, that the animation freezes and stops. If that, in fact, happens to you and the animation does freeze, it's because this form is being recreated so quickly that it doesn't update the animation. So what you can do if that does happen to you, which is not happening right now, is go back to the code, and right after, let's just take this one right here, you do the name of the form. Form 1 is the name of the form, dot refresh, or you can do this dot refresh. And what that does is that causes that screen to change at that moment as it's being scrolled. And if it doesn't have the animation, if the animation doesn't continue, this will help make it continue if you need it. So let's go back and take a look at what we've reviewed so far, folks. We've gone back in and we've taken a look at the SetBounds. We understand that it's pretty limited. There's not a lot of animation you can do with it. But if I have an animated GIF, I can make a move across the screen if I want to. I can resize objects, resize images if I want to. What else can I do? Let's take a look at one of the problems that we do have with this guy, though. Take a look at where height will cause an issue here. See here? I can really distort him quite a bit, also with width. So there's a lot of issues here that can cause problems. It's not clean. He's stretched out. But there's your example of basic animation, folks. Understanding it. Again, as I was mentioned before, the command basically is if I want to move everything at once, I could do that. So if I wanted to move, for example, let's get rid of this here. And if I wanted to move him maybe somewhere down in the bottom right-hand corner, so I want to move him over here, I can look and see what's that location. That location is about 884, 350. 884, 350. Okay, so let's take a look here. 884x, 350y. So let's move back over here. 884, and what was the other one I said? Location is 350. Let's move back to 350 here. This time I want both the X and the Y to be viewed, so watch this. So if I come back over here and I do my bound specified, okay, and hit a period, I can change both the X and the Y by changing location right here. That affects both of them at the same time. So I could do one or the other or both. And let's take a look at what that's going to look like when it's completed here. So let's come back over, grab this guy, move him back up in the top right-hand corner, and I just put that code, I believe, right behind here. So any change I make to this guy, any change, he's not going to read the value. He's simply going to move this guy. So if I click here, boom, he's moved down there automatically. So it's a pretty powerful command graphic-wise. I don't use it for animation graphics like this. I use it to expose, move, resize objects perhaps on a form. I've seen a lot of developers that what they'll do is they'll come back in there and they'll put controls on the bottom of the form, and you can actually force the form itself, this.setBounds as well. They'll leave the form looking like this, and without having to add those objects in, they just resize it, and then those objects come into view. So that's one technique that would be used in a case like this. I could think of a variety of different times that I've needed SetBounds, but again, from a graphic standpoint, you don't use it real often.